Well, despite all the censorship going on now, there is some hope left. So I have this little candle burning over here, and maybe YouTube will see that candle and find their way back to the light which they once were an example of. It's as you can see, that little candle is burning down pretty quickly, and nevertheless, let's get on with the real issues in the world here today. And there was an article yesterday in the New York Times. Probably many of you didn't catch it. I'm not a subscriber of the New York Times myself. The paper is actually very expensive to subscribe to. I get it online when I can find it. So here's this article. Israel puts media clamp on Gaza. 3 times in recent days, a small group of foreign correspondents was told to appear at the border crossing to Gaza. The reporters were to be permitted in to cover firsthand the Israeli war on Hamas, in keeping with a Supreme Court order issued by Israel against a 2-month hold of an Israeli ban to let foreign journalists entering into Gaza. Each time, these reporters were turned back on security grounds, even as relief workers and foreign nationals were permitted to cross the border. On Tuesday, the reporters were told not to even bother coming. And so, for the 11th day of Israel's war in Gaza, the several hundred journalists here to cover in wait in clusters away from direct contact of any fighting or Palestinian suffering, but with full access to Israeli political and military commentators eager to show them around southern Israel, where Hamas rockets have been terrorizing civilians. A slew of private groups financed mostly by Americans are helping guide this press corps around Israel. Now, I'd like you to remember this article is coming from the New York Times. Like all wars, this is partly about public relations. But unlike any war in Israel's history, in this one, the government is seeking to control entirely the message and narrative for reasons both of politics and military strategy, the New York Times says. This is the result of what happened in the 2006 Lebanon war against Hezbollah, noted a former army spokesman who was writing a doctoral dissertation on Israel's public diplomacy. Then the media were everywhere, in 2006 that is. Their cameras and tapes picked up discussions between commanders. People talked on live television. It helped the enemy and confused and destabilized the home front. Today, Israel is trying to control the information much more closely. He and others, including the post-Lebanon war investigation commissioned by the government of Israel, said that the army found that when reporters were allowed onto the battlefield in Lebanon, they got in the way of military operations by posing risks and asking questions. Beyond such tactical consideration, there is, of course, a political one. Daniel Seaman, director of Israeli government's press office, said that any journalist who enters Gaza becomes a fig leaf and front for the Hamas terror organization, and I see no reason why we should be helping that. Foreign reporters deny that their work in Gaza has been subject to Hamas censorship or control. It seems that many Israelis accept this assessment and shed no tears over the lack of media access to the conflict, despite repeated Foreign Press Association protests, including another one today. This attitude has been helped by supportive Israeli media, whose articles have been filled with feelings of self-righteousness and a sense of catharsis following what was felt to be undue restraint in the face of attacks by the enemy. According to a study of the first days of media coverage by the war by a liberal but non-partisan group called Keshef, the Center for the Protection of Democracy in Israel. The Foreign Press Association of Israel has been fighting for weeks to get its members into Gaza, first appealing to senior government officials and ultimately taking its case to the highest court of the land. On Wednesday, the justices worked out an arrangement with the organization whereby small groups would be permitted into Gaza when it was deemed safe enough for the crossing to be opened for other reasons. So far, every time the border has been opened, journalists have not been permitted to go in. At the same time that the reporters have been given less access to the conflict, the government has created a new structure for shaping its public message, ensuring that spokesmen of the major branches meet daily to make sure all are signing on to the same sheet. Again, this is coming from the New York Times. We're trying to coordinate everything that has to do with the image and content of what we are doing, and to make sure that whoever goes on the air, whether it is a minister, a professor, or an ex-ambassador, knows what he is saying, said Aviv Shiron, Deputy Director General for Media in the Foreign Ministry of Israel. We have our talking points, and we try to disseminate our ideas and message. There are other ways of to construe this context, of course. But no matter what, Israel's diplomats know that if journalists are given a choice between covering death and covering content, covering death and covering content, think about this for a minute. Death wins. So in a war that they consider necessary but poorly understood, they have decided to keep the media away from the death. That's quite a statement. You know, maybe the international media should have been kept away from the deaths occurring during the Holocaust, the Shoah. It's quite a reflection on the part of Israel, and I don't believe it's right, because deaths and injuries do matter. And when they say that the issue of proportionality is a false construct, because comparing death tolls offers no help in measuring justice and legitimacy, I wonder why we have museums today disseminating what happened during the Shoah and the Holocaust. Everyone needs to think about this very hard, because there is so much propaganda. Good night.